Hi everyone, I'm Cindy Crannell and I'm here today to talk about making thinking visible using Google Apps for Education. Joining me here today is Ben and Mark Shillito, and hopefully a few more will pop in. I'm calling you from London in the UK, and so wherever you are in the world, I hope it's either a good morning, afternoon, or evening. I'm going to get started. The first thing that we're going to tackle today is probably the most asked question that I get from teachers as I support them in the classroom. And that is, why should I integrate technology, and how is it going to make a difference in the learning and in my teaching? So I'm going to pop over to my slides and we'll get started. Okay, so let's start here. So the how and the why. So when teachers start asking me these questions, I think to myself, they are asking the right questions. It's not about what app should I use. They're asking about the teaching and the learning, which is really good to hear. And the story I'm going to focus in on is one teacher that I had an experience with, because I do a lot of coaching and mentoring with several teachers, but one particular teacher really stood out in my mind in the last 18 months, and that is a high school art teacher. And this happened about a year ago, and he came to me asking the how and the why. And he had some experiences with technology, and so we had to make a few goals. And before we started to make goals, I just asked if I could observe him teaching. So I sat through several of his classes through a span of about a week. And in that week's time, I got to know him quite well in terms of his style. And I noticed when we got back together that, and we started talking, that his main goal in terms of guiding his students is that he wanted them to be reflecting. And I started asking him, well, when do you have students reflect, and how are you having them reflect? And he said to me, well, I mainly do it at the end of the project, and I also do it through documents. So I just have them turn in a document to me, and that's their end of the project reflection. So I went on and we started talking about this idea of how to draw out and build students' thinking processes in terms of what they're thinking. So we talked about ways to do that, and we got a little stuck. We were looking at a lot of ways that he's currently doing that. But we also started to talk about the process that students were going through in his classroom. So not so much focusing on that product, but the process. And we also talked about formative feedback that he can give students along the way. So we talked that would also be a valuable assessment piece as students are going through the process and getting to their final product, that if he were to ask them to reflect along the way more often and more regularly, that he could use that as a way to formatively assess his students as well. So that led us to this book called Making Thinking Visible, because when I was talking to him, he said to me, you know, I don't get these really rich reflections that I hear that other teachers are getting their students to draw out of them. He goes, I want to know how to do that better. So we read this book together. And this book really focused on a lot of thinking routines that he wasn't aware of. He might have been doing them, part of them, but it really opened up his eyes to how to get students to think about their learning. And so we took out two ideas, main ideas or thinking routines from the book, and these were the two main ones that we used. So we used I used to think and now I think, and see, think, wonder. And this particular one really seemed to connect well with his subject area of art. So if you wanted to learn more about those thinking routines, I'm not going to focus too much on them today, but definitely it would be something for you to, after this broadcast, to go ahead and dig deeper into these 2 thinking routines. So after we read the book, we started to think about the technology, because he also said, well, some of my students, I know they struggle with writing. And we started to think about the types of technology that he could use to give students different mediums or ways to reflect, not just the written word. So we weren't going to completely give up written reflection, because we know that that's also an important skill to practice, but we wanted to find other ways that students could record their reflections and their thinking. So we focused on Google Apps for education for many reasons, and these are some of them, but also because it was something that he was also familiar with and already using with his students, but not in this particular way. So by the end of this, I will say that we found that the Google Apps had a lot of tools that, again, he was already using, and that we started to make a lot of connections with. So what tools are those tools? So we started the dialogue with these 4 key apps in Google Apps. And the first one that we started with was Google Forms. So he had used Google Forms before, but we turned it around, and during class one day, we did it not at the end of the project, but we did it just towards the beginning, where they were studying an artist and several of his works. And we used it in the discussion format in his class, so they filled it out at home as their homework. And they came in the next day, and he showed everybody in the class the other students' reflections. And that's how he started to draw out more of the thinking that was going on in the classroom about a particular work and that artist. And it seemed to fuel the discussion in class. It lit a fire that wasn't there before, and we started to recognize that students were more engaged and more enthusiastic, and it almost created a debate, if you will, in his classroom. So by taking that tool of Google Forms and using it in that way, there was a difference that was happening in his classroom. So he started to use that into pretty much a lot of what he did when he had classroom discussions. It also gave him a tool or a way to formatively assess his students and their individual thinking, because he was able to go back into that form and have that data. The other thing we tried is I noticed on their Google Drives that they were taking a lot of pictures. So we took more pictures, and we started to store them on their Google Drives. And he had them organize their drives in particular by a particular artist that they were studying and by the project that they were going to create. And we started taking pictures along the way and taking video and all storing them in one place. And what we started to see happen was this portfolio started to come alive inside the drive. And I said to this high school art teacher, I said, you know what we could do is we could have students explain how they got from point A to point B to then even the final project, and do a screencast and use this app. So that's what we did. And then they stored that as their final reflection. And again, by doing that, we saw that being more rich. It was more visual for not only the student, but also for the teacher and for somebody else that they might share that with. That might be a university or a parent or another student. So again, that really enriched what was happening in that classroom in terms of a final reflection. So I talked about this before, but the Google Drive, we saw that start to become that e-portfolio kind of naturally for students. It's where they put, again, all their pictures. They did things like stop motion and stored the videos in there, and it was much easier for them to then make that final reflection and do a narrative about it at the very end. The other thing that we did is we had them still do a lot of written reflection, but one of the things we did to change those written reflections along the way is we started to use the comment feature in Docs between having a private conversation between the student and the teacher. So we did that more often and more regularly, and it was more purposeful and individualized to that particular student, that he could go in and help guide that student's thinking and learning along the way. So there was a bit of a mini conversation going on alongside of these reflections, which wasn't happening before. And again, the high school art teacher kept saying to me, I didn't think of using it this way. I just thought of the final reflection as the final reflection. So then we got a little bit more fancy and we started to use an add-on in Google Docs, Xenia, which I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this is just an example that I have here. It's a screenshot. And in this example, again, we started using this add-on for students just to really make it easier and so they could hear themselves talking about their reflection. We also had the teacher leave audio comments on their written reflections, and again, it really was able, the teacher was able to draw more out of them. And for those students that maybe struggled with the writing part, this helped them reflect more clearly and more effectively, is what we saw. So one of the things we tried toward the end of the school year was this add-on called MoveNote, and we had students do a presentation at the end, and their final reflection was in this presentation format, and what they had to do was do a video going through some of the final pieces that they did, and that was the end of the year huge final reflection showing their process and what they learned throughout the year, and that was shared with parents. But again, I think they knew they had an audience, and it was another way to get them thinking about what they learned throughout the whole year. And again, you could use this for a particular project to show their process of all the different pictures that they took of their artwork along the way. Another idea that we tried was to give them more of an audience outside of the school. And with that audience, we looked at Blogger. And this is a blogging platform that students had access to, and a lot of them started to create blogs and not just post their final product, but their process along the way. And they put their reflections in that blog. So again, we started to give them more choice about how they wanted to reflect and where. So again, I think at the end, when we sat down, the high school teacher and myself, we sat down and really started talking about why is this valuable. We felt that the main component that we saw that was different from before was that we could really see it gave evidence to the teacher of progress over time. And I know that's a key area that a lot of government inspections here in the UK get, that they want to see to get a excellent. And through the Google Drive, that was a key feature that we could show that student's progress over time, not only to a government inspector, but also to a parent or to a university. So some of the takeaways is that we knew that the technology itself wasn't going to be the answer. We knew that just by using these tools, that was only part of the puzzle. We needed to have some of the strategies that we learned from the book, some of the thinking strategies, we needed to bring those in order for it to be complete. And the documentation and doing that regularly, having that built into the motor planning of the students, that they're doing that along the way, was another practice that we had to build in that wasn't there before. So taking pictures, taking lots of video, and stopping and asking students to stop and think about what they're doing along the way. So again, I said this before, but we did that all the time, and it just became the students' motor planning of what they did. And they got used to it, and the teacher got used to it, and it became their daily practice. So, and in the end, we came together, and he said, you know, I really want to share my success with integrating this idea of making thinking visible in my classroom. But I also have started to think about other content areas, and would this be valuable? Would it be possible for them to do this in math or in science? And again, he did a presentation to staff, and a lot of teachers took this idea and adapted it to their own practice. And so that again was the outcome for him, is that he was able to share what the process that he went through and show teachers examples of what he was doing, and then that was shared out to his staff at his school and even further. So that's kind of the main story of where we're of my journey that I took with one teacher, and I hope that we can answer any questions that might have come up along the way about this journey that I have taken with this teacher. Another thing that we talked about that I didn't mention at the beginning, but one of the things we realized was that when you go back to the question of answering why to use technology, a lot of people will say, well, because it will enhance what you're doing, or it will engage your students. And that's not necessarily true just because your students are engaged, that they're learning. You need to, not just because of the tools, it's also about looking at your practice as a teacher. And that was a big takeaway for this particular art teacher, that he realized I was using a lot of these tools before, but I was not using them in this way. And so it was a bit of his instructional practice that also had to go along with that piece of technology or technologies that he was using. So that was another takeaway that we both agreed was really, really important. So do we have any questions, Ben, from anybody in the audience that we could answer?
No one's asked any specific questions yet, but
do you have any questions?
Mentioning is we have representatives from all over the world. We've got Rio, we've got India, Pennsylvania, California, I believe somewhere in Scandinavia as well, if I remember correctly, Sydney, Adelaide. So an audience watching, and but no yet. For me, I've been I've shared the link to the book and some books that you mentioned, so it gives everyone a chance to start looking at that. I know some people may have joined after the start, so they may want to have a look at the reference to Making Thinking Visible, the book that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I've got a few questions.
Yeah, there have been some other books that have been
this question.
Okay. Go ahead.
Also, Mark's got a few questions that he's posting as well. Did the teacher in your example find they had to back off more?
That the teacher had to back off more? Is that what he's saying?
Yeah.
I think what I observed from my point of view was that he became more of that, and I'll use this word, I know it's overused in education, but he was more individually involved in each student because he knew where they were at from all of these check-in points that were happening along the way. And instead of just seeing that final product. So again, there was a little bit of a shift in his own involvement in individual students' progress, because he was getting new different information from students that he wasn't getting before. So he was also able, which I saw, to give them more resources to support their learning. And so, I mean, that was just something that I saw. I think it wasn't something that we picked out, but I think he really wanted to enrich those reflections, and in the end, that's what we saw along the way. And this happened over a span of a long time. This did not happen overnight. I think that's also a really important thing to point out. That was definitely something that we set some goals around, that we had to pick apart. We had several talks. It wasn't just something like it happened in a week. So.
A few more questions coming in as well. So first of all, Karen asked about Kaizena or Kaizenia.
It's a hard one to pronounce.
Just asking, yeah, is it just an app plugin from Google? Does it work with a built-in mic, or does it need a headset? So a few technical questions about how best to use that voice feedback app.
Yeah, you add it on to your Google Doc, just like any of the other add-ons. So when you're in a Google Doc, you would just go up to the toolbar and click on that and add it, connect it to your drive, and then once you connect it, the student has to do that as well to their drive, and then you can have that conversation and leave the audio, and you can do a lot more with it as well, but we mainly focused on the audio comments. You can do things with tagging and stuff, so it is much better than it was before. I like it as an add-on because it keeps you all in the same interface. You don't have to go into the website and leave the Google Doc, which is nice.
Yeah, I've done a bit of work with Kaizena myself. There's a lot of potential there once you get everything set up. I've got a few more questions coming in as well. Paul Pitt is asking, did you use Making Invisible book with the learning community?
Did I, with the students in the learning community? Do you think that's what he means?
I presume so. I'm sure he'll clarify in a moment. But yeah, if we start with the students.
I think we pulled out the strategies that were mentioned in the book. Again, they mentioned them as thinking routines. And what a lot of them were focused on was how to draw out deeper thinking, critical thinking from those students. So I saw a difference in the types of questions that the art teacher was asking his students, and I think that the students saw how purposeful they were and specific to either their particular project, and I think he was able to make them more specific because we were capturing through video and pictures. He was able to pinpoint certain areas, and that guided that student. So it really deepened, actually, now that I'm even reflecting right now myself, it deepened that one-to-one relationship that he had with his students. And he had all the evidence being collected on Drive, and that again was due to the fact that students got into that regular routine of taking a lot of the pictures and putting the video up and displaying their thinking in Drive and having it all in one place for him. So yeah, I think we didn't really show the book to the students, no. I think that was more just for the two of us to change some instructional practice going on inside the classroom to make that reflection more deep and rich. So.
Paul, just also come back on that.
Okay.
I was thinking of whether or not there were a group of teachers studying thinking in a book club type environment.
Well, I know Mark Shillitoe is on, and I think he's at a place where he can't pop in because it's quite noisy. But he does a lot of work with that idea as well. I know in the U.S. There are several bloggers that are ed tech bloggers that are also doing quite a bit of work around this idea, and I think that if you Google, use your Google search skills, you will find them. I will try to put some links, some additional links in. If you're interested, you can follow up on those blogs and on those particular people. So I can put their Twitter handles on and some of the other presentations that have happened around the world on this particular topic of making thinking visible. So it's just something that was shown to me actually at kind of it happened at the perfect moment as I was working with this high school art teacher that I happened to meet Mark, and he really was the one that told me about the book, and so I got it and started to read it, and then I gave it to the art teacher. So yeah, good timing, Mark, on that one for me. So
we've got a huge amount of questions coming in now, so I'll try and get through as many as I can. My apologies if anyone doesn't get an immediate answer, but they're all on the Edu on Air bit below talk. So Mariana missed the beginning, but she said, I noticed you describing a partnership between a teacher and an coach in a way. Any ideas on how we can guide and support teachers with projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think my personal approach, I've done a lot of coaching and mentoring of teachers, is to not go in and show them some new cool app or tool. I think a lot of it is about, again, the teaching. And so for me, I need to get to know that teacher not only on a personal level, but also them as a teacher. And I look myself as a coach to say, what are they doing really, really well? And so I've done this with language teachers as well, and I like to start with something that they're already doing quite well in their practice, and then build on that, not looking at what they're not doing. And I think that really builds that trust in that relationship. It's not about changing them, and having them come up with an idea of a way to improve their practice, and not focusing on the technology right away. And I think that was the strategy that I used with this high school art teacher that had the impact. I didn't come in and say, oh, we need to start using Google this or this app. It was just more about his practice and the teaching and the learning. And I think the more, as a coach or a mentor, that you can focus on that, I think that's more important, because you're driving in that right direction in terms of where people want to go. So it was more intrinsically motivating for that teacher, because it was all intrinsically his idea, actually, but I just was facilitating his ideas as well by saying, oh, I'm noticing that you're having your students reflect, and how do you feel about that? Do you feel like it's really the type of reflection that could we make that better? So it's about asking the right question.
Also addresses a question, Mark. Yeah. Mark also dropped in a question which you've kind of covered a little, I think, in your response then, is did your role as a tech integrator change through the process? Which I think you've kind of addressed a little bit anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think my role changes all the time dependent on where the teacher is at. So what was really great for me is this art teacher he already was using Google, and he knew the tools quite well, so I didn't have to go over a lot of the soft skills with that teacher. I think I didn't have to do really any sort of co-teaching model with him, because he was quite comfortable, where with a different teacher who's just starting out, I would have a much different approach. I might model a lesson, or before just setting them out on their own with the technology, because again, or I would just be there in the room to help. I think that's really important, is to meet people where they're at, and not have some sort of definitive roadmap for every single teacher, because that's not the case. So yeah. So coaching and mentoring is really, really important in schools. I will say that if you have some sort of a model where you're regularly meeting with your teachers, but individually meeting their needs, that's probably the key thing. So.
In terms of the time, I don't know what your...
Let's take one more
timings
question.
are.
Yeah,
We're obviously approaching the end of the official time.
Yeah, if we can just take one more question, and then I know there's another one starting.
The last one from Ashley Wilkes. She asks, can you give us an example of a success found in a different content area? So other than maybe in art.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've carried this over and have brought this into other areas in terms of, like, English was one area where the classroom discussions, same idea. If you're doing a book talk, the teacher, instead of just individually sending out that form to the teacher, that's how she enriched their classroom debate or discussion about a particular character or a problem in the book. And so she found that showing all of their answers to a question that she asked them really lit the fire in the room. And I think it's something that the students quite liked because, again, it was motivating to them. And it gave them a reason to answer that form. Because before, she was saying she was having a lot of issues getting kids to even want to answer the form, but knowing that their peers were going to see each other's answers, they did it. And then I think that discussion was more enriching. I think in terms of the progress along the way, she had used Kazenia to have that conversation with the student about their writing. So again, I think you could apply this to pretty much any content area. You just kind of have to think a little creatively sometimes. So yeah. Well, we're going to head out. Thank you, Ben, for coming and for helping me out with my question and answer session. That was amazing. And Mark, thank you also for attending. And I hope that, again, I will post the link to the presentation for those of you that showed up late, and then I will also add in a few other links and such for you to follow up on this idea of making thinking visible. So thanks again, everybody, for coming. I will see you all next year. Thanks.